morning, everyone. We are the last group to present, and our topics are Chicago perspective and psychological perspective. If you have any questions during the discussion, you may take note of them and ask them later at the end of our reporting. And as we have discussed a lot of perspectives during the past meetings, and as I've observed, almost all of them are interconnected. So, this report and concepts that you will encounter today will be really familiar to you na and easier na maintindihan. I hope. Hopefully. So, Chicago Perspective, it was developed by Clifford Shaw and Henry D. McKay. It is also known as ecological perspective or theory of social disorganization. As we go on, malalaman ninyo kung bakit ang other names ng Chicago are ecological perspective and social disorganization. And actually, this was a research conducted by the developers before becoming a perspective. But first, let's ask, why name the perspective Chicago? So the Chicago School needed answers for its exponentially growing problem of delinquency and crime. Thus, this became a primary focus in the city of Chicago. We're already familiar with the concept of delinquency, di ba? Yun yung crimes committed by minors, either punishable or not by the law. Na-derive yung name ng Chicago Perspective dito sa place na ito kung saan kinandak yung mismong research. So, to dig deeper why there's a growing problem of delinquency in that place, let's move on to its history. So, early to mid 1800s, many large US cities like Chicago had no formal social agencies to handle problems of urbanization. No social workers, building inspectors, garbage collectors, or even police officers. Once police officers were introduced, their duties often included finding lost children and collecting the garbage because there weren't other agencies to perform these tasks. It is said here na walang social agencies ang mga malalaking cities sa US kahit man lang other institutions aside sa peace officers or tayong mga social workers, wala. So, imagine the chaos na nangyari sa mga large places na ganoon. This is the very reason why the developers of this theory decided na mag-conduct ng research to find out the cause of the high rate of delinquency sa Chicago. Therefore, communities were largely responsible for solving their own problems, including crime and delinquency. By the late 1800s, however, Chicago was largely made up of citizens who did not speak a common language and did not share each other's cultural values. As you can observe, isang reason aside from walang mga formal institutions why common ang crimes and delinquency was that people had no common medium for them to use, either for communicating or interacting with others. Very heterogeneous kasi yung population ng Chicago. It was discussed to us naman na, di ba? I think kay Ma'am Social Work 117 na kapag mataas yung pagkakaiba-iba ng mga tao sa isang community, expect na hindi harmonize yung society kasi wala silang common denominator or similarities. And yung most fundamental instrument to use na language or to at least cultivate a relationship or form an acquaintance with others is wala. Talagang disorganized na society ang expected na mangyayari. Ito na yung rason kung bakit natawag rin itong social disorganization theory. Nagets nyo ba, guys? Or sakto lang yung speed ko?
Gusto lang.
Sakto lang.
Thank you. The leaders and people of Chicago needed theoretical guidance to develop solutions to their problems, particularly regarding the high rates of delinquency. This was a key factor in why the Department of Sociology at the UC became so important and dominant in the early 1900s, where essentially the modern sociology developed there was needed most to solve its social problems. So yan na yung justification kung bakit needed talaga ang pag-research about that place And fortunately, it birthed the Chicago perspective. This perspective ang isang rason kung bakit ang Chicago School ay famous and essential noon sa pag-explain ng mga phenomenon doon. So, let's uncover kung ano nga ba ang ino-offer nitong perspective na ito or kung ano ang explanation ng theory na ito. So, kindly read guys, nabanog boses ko. Kindly read, sinati kahit nag-volunteer nga agbasa.
Ako.
Sige, thank you.
Chicago perspective. This perspective claimed that delinquency was not caused at the individual level, but was considered to be the normal response of normal individual to abnormal social conditions. Consequently, there was an indirect loss in the ability to act communally, and individuals exhibited unrestricted freedom to express their dispositions and desires, often resulting in delinquent behaviors, according to Short, 1972.
Thank you, Jeff. So, ina-emphasize ng perspective na ito na ang cause ng delinquency and other deviant behaviors ay hindi dahil sa inherent na personality ng isang individual. Hindi dahil ang isang tao ay kulay ng kutis niya is black, it doesn't mean na they are thief or dangerous people na. Hindi nagbe-base sa nationality, race, characteristics, or other demographic background or factors sa pagdetermine ng ability ng isang tao to become a criminal. Rather, mas i-consider natin yung location and environment ng isang tao upang makita natin kung may possibility na sila ay gumawa ng deviant acts. Kaya kung ang isang tao ay nasa poor urban neighborhood, then diyan na natin makikita ang impluensya ng kanyang environment at ng mga taong nakakasalumuha niya sa pagbuo ng kanyang personality or personalidad. So I hope that's clear. Next, other name of Chicago perspective, social disorganization theory. This is the consequence of communities' inability to realize common values and to solve the problems of its residents, resulting in the breakdown of effective social control within that community. For example, in Chicago at that time, kung saan na-derive ang perspective na ito, di ba, as I've said, disorganized yung mga tao kasi walang leader man lang na mag-set sa kung ano yung norm sa social behavior nila. And in the first place, how can they set a standard sa tamang pag-behave kung magkakaiba sila ng background and hindi sila nagkakaintindihan? That is why nawawalan sila ng ability to self-reflect or hindi nila alam yung limit ng kanilang actions and walang unity among the members as stated dyan sa second bullet form. Isang reason din why Chicago is very heterogeneous at that time, it was found out with their initial investigation na often na nag-o-occur yung pag-emigrate. Kasi di ba malaki silang city sa US. Then marami ring apartment na maaaring maging tahanan ng mga tao doon. Actually, may isang concrete example na binigay ng theory na ito. I think sa research yata nila or PDF na book based sa background ng Chicago. Sabi niya, a tenant in a public housing unit may live there for years and never form a relationship with his or her neighbors. Residents who do not know the children of the area were less likely to intervene when the children displayed unacceptable behavior. Sinasabi nito na dahil walang commonalities ang mga tao sa Chicago, parang kanya-kanyang buhay ang kalakaran doon, kaya walang matibay na paraan sa pagkontrol, hindi lang sa mga bata, kundi pati rin sa ibang mga tao doon. So lastly, last na definition ng ecological perspective ay it states that a person's physical and social environments are primarily responsible for the behavioral choices that a person makes. This is why Chicago perspective is also known as ecological perspective. Ecological amo tayo metan, di ba guys? The environment nga yan, di may isang tao. Sinasabi kasi nito na ang isang tao ay nag-exhibit ng deviant na behavior because of his environmental influences. As I reiterate, example nito ay yung kawalan na social norms kasi walang leader or unresponsive ang mga leader sa community. Pwede rin yung mga bad influence ng mga tao sa kanilang lugar. Kasi kapag, di ba, kapag ang isang individual ay nasa situation na siya ay naiipit, like what the string theory by Robert Merton have proposed, tendency is tataas yung possibility na magkakamit siya ng undesirable na action just what the person wanted to gain. Lalong-lalo na kapag ang isang tao ay malapit lang sa kanya yung opportunity sa paggawa ng crime. Di ba as the famous saying goes, desperate times call for desperate measures. One example rin nito is kapag ang isang neighborhood ay full of criminals and, for example, other deviant na ginagawa ng mga tao like prostitutes, kasashi kuma. Example lang ito. Or sex workers, I'm sorry. E di dapat ti panangawag kanyadan. Then the children who live there ay may possibility na mai-influence sila na tumulad sa ganoong deeds. Like, we already know naman na, di ba, na itong sinasabi ko is yung concept ng child at risk. Ito yung point ng theory na ito. Mas importanteng isipin na ang environment or residential location ng isang tao ay significant or dapat mas i-consider sa pag-determine ng possibility na siya ay magkakommit ng criminal activity rather than his inherent personality or characteristics. The unethical influence of an individual's environment is the main indicator that he may engage or commit a deviant behavior. Hindi sa kung ano ang demographic background niya. Kasi consider. But ang talagang isipin is kung anong klaseng environment ang tinitirhan niya. So that is all about ecological perspective. Next, 4 specific assumptions as an explanation of delinquency. Before we discuss this, just a refresher na diba nasabi ko kanina na research ito before naging considered as a perspective. Ang assumptions na mga ito are based or derived on racial background and history na na-discuss ko kanina about the conditions in that place. And for the information of everyone, this will be reported and explained to you by Ms. Aspa.
For specific assumption as an explanation of delinquency. Number 1, the collapse of community-based controls and people living in these disadvantaged neighborhoods are responding naturally to environmental conditions. Ang unang assumption kung bakit nagkakaroon ng delinquency ay dahil sa kakulangan ng pag-establish sa mga pulisiya sa komunidad ng Chicago. Dahil dyan, para sa kanila ang delinquency ay normal lamang na response sa kanilang kapaligiran dahil sa kakulangan ng kontrol sa pamamagitan ng pagkakaroon ng pulisiya. Number 2, the rapid growth of immigration in urban disadvantaged neighborhoods. Ito yung madalas na pagkakaroon ng in and out ng mga tao sa isang komunidad kaya't nagkakaroon ng kawalan ng interaktibo at pagde-develop ng relasyon sa kapwa miyembro ng komunidad. Number 3, business located closely to the disadvantaged neighborhoods that are influenced by the ecological approach of competition and dominance. Sila kung maeti dagiti business nga located iti asidegen ti disadvantaged neighborhoods ket prone da iti krimen. Isu eto agi umadwan iti kaso ti delinquent behavior kasla kuma stealing ken robbery. The last one, disadvantaged urban neighborhoods lead to the development of criminal values that replace normal society rules. Ang pagiging mahirap sa mga neighborhood na ganito ang nagsasanhi o nagpapalaki ng possibility na magkaroon ng delinquency or delinquent behavior. So ito urban neighborhood ti mag-influence the other poor people ti pa nagkaroon ti criminal values or delinquent behavior. For example, almost all members of a certain community get criminal da amin. Imbes nga ti roles jay society o ket normal, mas agdepender detoy ken nagiti values ti mismo nga members ti may isa nga community. Dito iti pagkuan ti delinquent behavior nga punto natin. Thank you.
It was revealed in their theory that neighborhoods with the highest crime rates have at least 3 common problems. First is physical dilapidation. The word dilapidation is used to describe a house or a building that's been neglected. Ito yung mga building o bahay na nabubulok na dahil sa kapabayaan. Yung pagkasira ng building o bahay means that the physical life of a building is tending to be expired. Ibig sabihin, ito ay palapit na sa kondisyon na pwedeng maging dahilan upang hindi na magamit. Dilapidated buildings have consequences in terms of people perceptions of an area. For example, yung mga tao, iisipin nila na pwedeng gamitin ang mga dilapidated buildings for their illegal activities. Pwede itong paghangoutan ng mga magnanakaw and other crimes. Ang mga dilapidated area kasi is may negative effect ito sa mga tao na pwedeng mag-lead into deviant behavior or delinquency. Dahil ang mga areas na ito can attract antisocial behavior including violence and crimes. Next is poverty. Poverty is one of the problem kung bakit tumataas ang crime rates. Individuals are more likely to commit criminal acts if when they are experiencing poverty because of their economic status dahil sa kahirapan nakakagawa sila ng mali kagaya ng pagnanakaw and other crimes. The third is higher level of ethnic and cultural mixing. Ito ang isa sa problema kung bakit tumataas ang crime rates ay dahil sa pagkakaiba-iba ng cultural background nila. Like for example, their language, religion, sense of place, and many other cultural aspects. When it comes to the word ethnicity or culture, hindi ibig sabihin nun ay nagbe-base sila sa kanilang demographic background para sabihin na sila ay may high possibility na mag-commit ng crimes. Rather, mas tinitignan yung pagkakaroon ng high statistics sa presence ng maraming culture. And with higher rate, if heterogeneity, higher rate rin ang differences and difficulties ng mga members ng society doon kaya nagkakaroon ng sablay na communication and pag-build ng relationships with others. Para mas maintindihan nating mabuti, this is the model of Shaw and Mackey theory of social disorganization. Ang pagkakaroon ng presence of poverty, heterogeneity, physical dilapidation, high mobility of residents, and other social ills is nagli-lead into social disorganization. Ito yung mga dahilan kung bakit nagkakaroon ng social disorganization. So if nag-e-exist ang social disorganization, nagkakaroon din ng criminal behavior. Kaya nagkakaroon ng criminal behavior ay dahil naiimpluwensyahan yung mga tao na gumawa ng crimes dahil doon sa situation sa kanilang neighborhoods. People are much more likely to commit criminal acts if the society or environment are run down and dangerous. It was also further revealed that the common characteristics of the neighborhoods that Shaw and Mackay noted was that there was a highly transient of population as well as unemployed among the residents of the neighborhood they have observed. It was also implied that the residents of a neighborhood that fits the profile of having a high rate of poor, culturally mixed residents in a dilapidated area cannot come together to solve problems such as delinquency among youth. Yung mga Oringa noong neighborhood daw is mayroong mataas na pansamantalang population ng mga tao at maraming mga unemployed residents based sa kanilang naobserbahang neighborhoods sa Chicago. According to Shaw and Mackay, ang ganitong klaseng neighborhoods na may mataas na statistika ng kahirapan at pagkakaiba-iba ng kultura ay hindi nila kayang isolve yung problema nila as a whole, lalong-lalo na yung delinquency among youths. The next reporter is Ms. Bilong. She will tackle about the importance and summary of this theory.
Importance of this theory. First, help improve conditions in society when it most needed, which can be appreciated only by understanding the degree of chaos and crime that existed in Chicago in late 1800s and early 1900s. Second, this theory helps government and law enforcement policymakers make firm strategies to help prevent criminal activity and make communities a safer space and place in disadvantaged areas. So, explain di ba? But, before nga mapantay yung summary, tingnan muna natin ang short summary or main points ng perspective na ito. Take note kasi baka isa ito sa mga ipapakwiz namin. Summary of Chicago perspective. First, developed by Clifford Shaw and Henry D. Mackay. Second, also known as ecological perspective or theory of social disorganization. Third, nationality. It was vitally related to juvenile delinquency. Fourth, at the core at the core of this theory, location matters when it comes to predicting illegal activity. Fifth, a person's residential location is more significant than the person's characteristics when predicting criminal activity. Ang emphasis ng perspective na ito ay ang reason raw kung bakit napupush ang isang tao na mag-commit ng deviant act or delinquency are not their attributes or demographic factors like ethnicity, cultural background, religion, nationality, etc. But yung location, residency, or environment factors ang nagbibigay sa kanila ng rason sa paggawa ng crime. Sixth, neighborhood that have the highest rate of crimes and delinquency have three common problems. One, physically dilapidation. Second, poverty. Third, heterogeneity. Seventh, the three common problems are what leads to state social disorganization, which it turns lead to crime and delinquency. That's all for the summary of Chicago perspective.
Thank you, Miss Belong. That the importance of this theory kat naganan nalakamit lang nga awatanen. So there's no need to further explain that one. Tapos ito yung summary, i-double lang, may katlo, nationality is not vitally related to juvenile delinquency. Hansa nabasa nga na siya ni Miss Belong kasi nabasit to yung text. So anyways, let's move on to the second topic that we are about to present to you, which is psychological perspective. So we have seven types of perspective here. First, the psychodynamic, then behavioral, cognitive, biological, cross-cultural, evolutionary, and then humanistic perspective. So let's first tackle psychodynamic perspective, and this will be discussed to you by Kuya Lape.
Psychodynamic perspective originated with the work of Sigmund Freud, emphasized the role of unconscious mind, early childhood experiences, and interpersonal relationship to explain human behavior. Freud believed that human behavior was motivated by an energy he called libido or id. Freud conceived of the mind as being composed of three key elements: the id, the ego, and the superego. The example na nito guys, itinay baga ti id jay, amo yung ti ni id ni Freud, diba? Di kiti mabaling nga either or good or bad to desires ng agdamdaman ti Greek gratification. Tapos eti desires nga etiket mabaling nga result ti bad or deviant behavior. Next. Behavioral perspective. Behavior perspective focuses on learned behaviors, founded on the work of psychologists such as Edward Thorndike and John B. Watson. It confuses solely on observable behaviors rather than on emphasizing internal states. This is different from the most other approaches because they view people and animals as controlled by their environment, and specifically that we are the result of what we have learned from our environment. The behaviorist perspective is concerned with low environmental factors called stimuli, affect observable behavior called response. Behavior perspective is the way we have and learn be explained through our interactions with the environment. And also behaviorists suggest that behavior can be acquired through conditioning and can therefore be observed without consideration of thoughts and our feelings. The example na pwede guys, When the teachers rewards their class or certain students with a party or a special treat at the end of the week for good or behavior throughout the week. Next. Classical conditioning is the process that was first discovered by the Russian psychologist. His famous studies on the digestive systems of dogs. It is discovered that the dogs has been conditioned to salivate whenever they saw the white cat on his love assistant. Because of animals associated the white cats with the presentation of food and a learned response was formed. Ito di example namin kama siya, gorgorek digi sound ti alarm clock. Tapos ti association na digi nga sounds kit agreeing na tayo nga nasapa din. No paulit-ulit yung nga mga digi nga notion na digi ke para kanya ke kasla makapa anxiety. Then operant conditioning is the learning process described by the American psychologist. Operant conditioning involves using reinforcement or punishment as a consequence for a behavior. Actions followed by reinforcement become more likely to be repeated in the future, while those followed by punishment become less likely to occur in the future. For example, dito kasla ko madigi ko mamesa nga estudyante kit amin nga barkada na kit honored. Kit kasla umapal din ti arami din na lang yung cheat. Yung ti consequence na digi kit mapanti principal's office. Or mabali or other example kay gi for example ma-fail digi exam na or mabalin met nga mapaayaban ti parents na. Then after may bin for punishment na nga ito yan kit ma-learn the student don nga cheating is not a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Kuya Lape. Just an interjection. The difference between classical conditioning and operant conditioning is that the classical conditioning gamin ket, di ba? Kasi the example dito ket the dog, it was discovered. Kasla ti kwa na ito yun ket inherent kuma innate kanti may sa tao ito yung type of conditioning. Tapos the operant conditioning, kailangan tayo nga i-establish either through reinforcement or punishment. So, no tiitad tayo kat reinforcement, the actions will become more likely to be repeated in the future. So, with reinforcement, mabalin nga ag-repeat nga good nga behavior. However, no may actions na may sa nga tao ket madi, then may kanti punishment. So, no may kan punishment, it will become less likely to occur in the future. So kasi dati I think mabalin tayo may connect ato kan theory ti deterrence, if I'm not mistaken, to stop criminals from doing deviant behaviors. So lang. Let's go to the next slide. Cognitive perspective.
Cognitive perspective. This area of psychology focuses on mental process like memory, thinking, problem solving, language, and decision making, influenced by psychologists such as Jean Piaget and Albert Bandura. Considered as one of the most prominent ways of thinking about the human mind and behavior today together with biological perspective. Cognitive perspective example. Making a judgment or decision about a certain matter based on the information you receive or already know. Ang input ay ang info na nare-receive mo and then your brain process it in order to make a logical decision and yung decision na iyon ay ang magiging output na. Learning is also a cognitive perspective. The way our brain analyzes the lesson that we take sa klase. For example, mga major subjects natin and then we get to remember or memorize yung mga input na iyon and so ay mai-apply natin in real life sa ating profession, making it as our output. For example, both human brains and computers process information, store data, and have input in output procedure. This had led cognitive psychologists to explain that memory comprises of three stages: encoding, where information is received and attended to; storage, where the information is retained; and retrieval, where the information is recalled. Biological perspective. This point of view emphasizes the physical and biological basis of behavior. Researchers with a biological perspective on psychology might look at how genetics influence behavior or how damage to specific areas of the brain and diseases affect their actions and personalities. The emergence of advanced brain imaging techniques such as MRIs and PET has allowed psychologists to learn much more about how the brain, nervous system, and other body systems contribute to how we think and act. Biological psychologists explain behaviors in neurological terms, the physiology and structure of the brain, and how this influences behavior. Many biological psychologists have concentrated on an abnormal behavior and have tried to explain. For example, biological psychologists believe that schizophrenia is affected by levels of dopamine, or a neurotransmitter. These finds have helped psychiatry take off and help relieve the symptoms of mental illness through drugs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ti may sapay nga mabalin nga example na etoy actually ket edi explanation ti autism, epilepsy, and intellectual disability. According to a new study, this was due to inherited mutations. So, basta may baga tayo nga biological perspective ket iyak explain na di behavior ti may sa tao. No kitaan tayo di genetics ti may sa tao or no kitaan tayo di brain ti may sa nga tao. So that's all about biological perspective. So next is cross-cultural perspective.
Cross-cultural perspective. Psychologists and researchers in this school of thought look of human behaviors across different cultures. By looking at these differences, we can learn more about how culture influences our thinking and behavior. For examples, researchers have looked at how social behaviors differ in individualistic and collectivistic cultures. In individualistic cultures, such as the United States, people tend to exert less effort when they are part of a group, a phenomenon known as social loafing. In collectivistic cultures, such as China, people tend to work harder when they are part of a group. Cross-cultural perspective involve the systematic comparison of different cultures that aim to understand variation of human behaviors as it is influenced by cultural context. This research approach is primarily concerned with examining how our knowledge about people that their behaviors from one culture may or may not hold for people from other cultures. For example, sa kumake na pan na di US, and then kaslang haanak sanay tagamin sa bali iti ayan kon. Kasi ti Philippines ken US kitag sa bali ti cultures. For example, ket di baybay no GUS ket naka-proper suit da, naka-swimsuit da. Kaya no mo Pilipinas ket nakakalugong tayo, nakapants tayo, t-shirts, long sleeve. Isu nga ti sa bali nga bansa, pagsisinabali tayo iti cultures. Evolutionary perspective. The evolutionary perspective suggests that various mental processes exist because they serve an evolutionary purpose, meaning that they aid in human survival and reproduction. A central claim of evolutionary psychology is that the brain, and therefore the mind, evolved to solve problems encountered by our hunter-gatherer ancestors during the upper Pleistocene period over 10,000 years ago. Most behavior that we can see display are believed to have developed during our EEA. EEA is environment of evolutionary adaptation to help us survive. Evolutionary perspective is a natural selection to explain how gender differences evolve. Individuals who are fertile live long enough to reproduce and are able to raise their offspring will successful pass of their characteristic to the next generation. For examples, lightning of fire. Bato nga pag kiniskisen ket makapagbalin iti fire. Di ba kasi mati obrain da idi na unang panahonin. Ngem tatan naka-create da iti way or naka-invent da iti solusyonen so nga adda iti posporo ken lighteren nga iso ti susaren tayo tapno makapag kuha tayo iti fire. Ken ti may sapay nga examples iti evolutionary perspective ket hunting of food. Tapno makaala da iti makan or makakwada ti food ket agusar da ti batu ken kayo. Ngem tatan ket tapno makaala da iti makan or makaala da ti makan agusar da ti iskopeta wenno deje palsiit. Ken ti may tigpakpakita iti deviant behavior iti evolutionary perspective ket war. War idi ket aginagaw dalang iti land of property, tribu to tribu idi. Ngem tatan clashes sen. Example iti may nga clashes ket jay Iran. Nabuya yung atamet siguro dayjay idin dayjay nakaro nga laban dayjay Iran idi. Tapos the summary of evolutionary perspective dagitoy nga examples ko ket nakita idin idi sinaunang panahonen. Ingana tatta makikita tayo pa lang but nag-innovate, nag-value ket mas better. As you can see, the examples of war ket explain iti deviant behaviors.
And lastly, last perspective under psychological perspective is humanistic perspective. So this was founded by Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. It is a way of evaluating an individual as a whole. Psychologists here emphasize the essentiality in completely understanding others' need because it can affect their behavior. This perspective relates to the idea of being entirely unique and that you are your own individual. This perspective also suggests that we are each responsible for our own happiness and well-being as humans because we have the innate or inborn capacity for self-actualization, which is our unique desire to achieve our highest potential as people. So, this perspective tells us na by focusing and being aware to our unique individuality or kung ano yung edge natin, like positive attributes that we have, mas na-motivate pa tayo na i-uncover or mas malaman kung ano yung peak ng ating self. Kasi we have the ability to rationalize and because we are the highest form of animals. So, as we all know, si Abraham Maslow yung may theory sa hierarchy of needs natin, which are divided into 5 categories and yung nasa pinakamataas ay self-actualization, which includes morality, creativity, spontaneity, problem-solving, lack of prejudice, acceptance of facts. So, this self-actualization ay hindi lahat ng tao ay naa-achieve ito. And even the other slices of the pyramid, sometimes hindi nila nakukuha or makukuha yung mga needs na iyon. Bakit? Kasi madaming rason why some cannot attain their highest potential or at least the bare minimum. Baka hindi enough yung pagsashape or pagtugon sa isang category ng need nila kaya hindi makamove on ang isang individual towards their highest potential, which can affect or become a hindrance for them to achieve their ability to function properly as a member in the community. Nasabi rin dito na a person acts a certain way due to the influence of his needs. His needs can either be kulang or met na. Pero sa case na kapag hindi natutugunan yung needs na iyon, then most probably hahanap ng way ang isang tao to satisfy that need. Diyan na natin makikita ang implication ng humanistic perspective when it comes to the manifestation of a deviant behavior. So again, to summarize this humanistic perspective, ang main point nito ay people can achieve their highest potential. It's just that there are obstacles that a person can stumble upon along the way of achieving his potentiality. If a person can survive from it, then good. And if not, it will permit him to utilize unethical or immoral behavior to satisfy his needs. So that is all about our report on psychological perspective and Chicago perspective. So, do you guys have any question? You can raise them now. Hello? Hello? Mangigdak ba, guys?
Well,
Dagiti other groups, adati question yo? Or hanyo nga nagets, or hanyo naawatan, nga part to report meetup, no? Maawatan tay amin talaga. Hello? As in, awan? Guys, awan talaga, ti question yo. Awan ka no kani JV. Dagida duma.
Di ko mo yura, di kami nawatan na lang yung chapi-chapi kami kanya. Yung classical and operant conditioning.
Wait, let's go back to the slides.
Nag-chapi-chapi kami kanya tatay. So kung nawatan unay.
At the classical conditioning can operant.
Well,
Di ba explanation ko or yung explanation ni Kuya Lape?
both. Basta kung tato nag-chapi-chapi.
Wait, let's just go back garod. So, behavioral perspective focuses on learned behaviors. Kasla ko mano, dati nga perspective, kasi dati ilulook up tayo nga may isa nga model, kasi kuma, nga, for example, nga kayat tayo nga ma-acquire age nga behavior. So nga, kuna na dito, it focuses on learned behaviors. So, kuna na pa ito, it focuses solely on observable behaviors rather than on emphasizing internal states. So, kasla ti point na ito, through external or environmental factors, did you nga ma-explain no apay nga no apay nga ti may sa tao ket agbi-behave ti may nga way. Kuna napay didtoy, it is concerned with how environmental factors affect observable behavior. Stimuli iso dayjay environmental factors. Tapos observable behavior response. Awan gamin doon ay tina-search kong example to behavioral perspective. Anya ba, namaya? Guys, nakaka-groupmates ko, do you have any idea na niya mabalin nga may interject na example? Or da kayo guys, no dati idea yo about etoy. Mabalin nyo met nga i-share, tapnuhan lang nga da kami ti agsasao. Share naman dyan. Jeff, dati idea or niya ti opinion mo or first ka impression mo ito yung behavioral perspective?
Di impression ko ng behavioral kay just bilang si attitude tayo kasi dyan pinaggargaraw tayo. Di lang ti talaga nga basta pasok kanya ti behavioral perspective. Since awatable may eta behavioral perspective, di lang talaga classical and operant conditioning.
Classical and conditioning. So, classical conditioning, it is the process discovered. Kung naman iulit ko, ito no ma-distinguish tayo niya ti classical conditioning kan operant conditioning. Classical conditioning ket innate, kaslaan mo tayo nga ti may sa tao ket or may nga bagay ket ag-aak in a certain way, gamin ma-affect so na ti environment na. Ngayon ti operant conditioning gamin, kasla dati kailangan nga ubraen, kasla kontrolem edi environment ti may sa tao. Tapno ag-act dati certain way. Ti classical conditioning, orehan mo nga kontrolan di environment nan, edi mismo nga response ti may sa tao or thing, ket innate nga reaction nan. Kasi ti operant conditioning, niya ti example ni Kuyan. For example, adatig cheat ko nga classmate or a student nga cheat. Tapos, nung naamon ti may nga teacher, ket most likely punishment ti mayted. Tapno hanga occur in the near future manen hanga maulit AJ nga action. No met reinforcement meaning AJ action nga napasamak ket good. For example kuma anya ba tinamayat? Dagiti latakwan no kuma agpaaramid ti activity ti teachers tayo, di ba? Ibagbagada nga adda ti plus points no adda ti plus points no nasapam nga i-turn in dagiti activities mo or nasapam nga obraen, di ba? So, no adda ti reinforcement, no dati plus points, positive sanction nga mapasamak, more likely nga ag-repeat AJ nga action ti may sa tao in the near future. So again, ti classical conditioning, hamo kailangan nga kontrolin, hamo kailangan na ikan ti reinforcement or punishment ti may nga action, ti may nga taon. Kasi innate, makitam talaga AJ no met operant conditioning ket kailangan nga ikanti reinforcement or punishment. Kailangan mga kontrolin. Di may isa pang example gamit ti classical conditioning atay ni Kuya ket di ba AJ na ganan? Alarm clock, alarm something like that. Di ba no mangegtay dagos AJ alarm clock and ket syempre ti mapano na tay dagos ay apo griing na kon. Makapa-anxiety kasla kasi ti association tay dagos. Kasla no mangyeg tayo AJ ket adda ti automatic response tayon kasla kasi kuma. Kasi ti classical conditioning kasla senses mo ti what do you call that? Ag prevail kasay. Nagets you guys? So that's the explanation of classical conditioning and operant conditioning.